Welcome to the American Med Spa Association podcast, Medical Spa Insider. This week, AmSpa founder Thiersch is speaking with Robin Ntoh, Vice President of Aesthetics for Nextech.
Refresh your body, mind, and career at the Women in Aesthetic Leadership Conference, being held October 3rd through 5th at California's beautiful Terranea Resort. Walk is more than just another convention. It's an immersive retreat that combines education and networking with rejuvenation. For women aesthetic professionals who dedicate their time to the health and happiness of others, this is the opportunity to get away and focus on your own wellness. Reconnect to your passions and return with a bold new inspiration for your business. Walk celebrates the med spa industry's opportunities for female empowerment and entrepreneurship, including the ceremony for the 2025 Distinguished Women Awards. Find out more at experiencewalk.com. That's experiencewalc.com. And as a Medical Spa Insider listener, you can receive 10% off your registration if you use the promo code WALK10. That's WALC10.
Promo code valid for inclusive registration until September 11th, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, or standard registration until October 3rd, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Promo code only applies to the primary registrant and cannot be combined with any additional offers.
Okay, everybody, welcome. This is Medical Spa Insider. Thiersch here. This is the podcast for AmSpa, the American Med Spa Association, and I am very, very pleased to be joined by Robin Ntoh, the Vice President of Aesthetics for Nextech, which I'm super excited to have you on, Robin. Nextech is, obviously, you are a kind of a giant in the medical software, EMR space, and have been for a long time. And certainly have a big presence in aesthetics. We've started to work together a little bit more, which I'm excited about because I think you bring a lot of credibility to the space. You bring a lot of insight into things like compliance and safety and all those things that we're doing. So I'm excited to talk to you. You've been obviously been a big part of what AmSpa has been doing for the last couple of years. You've spoken at MSS. You're going to be speaking at the Women's in Aesthetic Leadership Conference here in, I think, 5 short weeks out in Terranea, which I'm super excited about, and hopefully we'll have a chance to chat about that in a little bit. But first of all, how are you doing? And whatever that background you have, that thing is phenomenal. Like, I want to be where you are.
AI at its best, we basically are trying to standardize as AI does for most of us, so it's actually pretty good. But
yeah, that's awesome.
No, it's well, AI is its own topic, right? So there's to say there, but thank goodness to AI because it actually helps streamline so many of the things that we do these days if we can incorporate it.
Yeah.
No, I love how you paraphrased, where Nextech is and what we're thinking, and I think of us as someone that's been around a long time. With that comes a lot of things that are legacy, and sometimes legacy is critical when you're thinking about an organization as it evolves. And I think it's a great segue in thinking about where Nextech has its own cross to bear when it comes to staffing. And so we know that staffing is so critical. One of the things I have the opportunity to host is an aesthetics steering committee that is we met just yesterday, and it brings in industry consultants and also KOLs in the industry, and we have this opportunity to really listen. And again, yesterday, one of the topics of conversation was staff. And regardless of your size, whether you're a small business just starting out or you've been doing this a long time, staffing is just always going to be part of what we have to deal with. I myself relish the fact that I don't have direct reports any longer. Not that I don't love it, but I have to say,
no, I mean, that's like you've reached the pinnacle when you get to that point, because I mean, it is, I always say this when we do our whether it's our business boot camps or speaking, whatever, managing people is by far the most difficult part. And I love what you've brought to the table. Your talk, I think it was at MSS when you had a whole segment on this, and you've got so much great insight into it. And one of the things that, as we're kind of framing our conversation today, well, not only is it difficult, but the people management part of it is it's essential, right? Because like the experience that folks get at a medical aesthetics practice is arguably the most important thing. And the only way you're going to get that experience is if you have good, well-trained staff, a well-trained team. And that is so hard. It's just so hard to find people. What's the current climate like that? Just to throw you kind of a curveball at the beginning, like what are you thinking? Like, are people having trouble? Because for years, people had trouble finding good talent, good injectors. What are you hearing right now from folks?
Oh, great way to kind of segue into the next topic, which is around change. But I would say that honestly, it's a little frightening because they'll hire good talent, they'll invest in them, and then they leave. And
Hmm.
so the word investment is important to note because it
Right.
costs money to bring people on board, especially if you do it well and if you do it right. And so practices are starting to think about, well, okay, people are going to eventually leave, they'll transition out. How do I protect my business? How do I secure those patients? Because some of them are providers and they might move on. And some things are natural. It is not wrong to expect that people will leave a business because they're eventually going to outgrow that position and there's no place else for them to go. Or they move away. They're
Hmm.
gonna move. Or they're just not the right fit and they outgrow or you outgrow them. That happens too. I
Hmm.
think the thing that people don't do is prepare for what should be expected to happen. People are going to leave. And so that is still something that's happening. But I think what I'm hearing is that there's not this preparedness in place. They just have this expectation people are going to start with them and stay with them forever. It's just the
Yeah.
wrong way to think about your business. I think
It's
it is a single point of failure is having only one person that knows how to do it all. That's a huge
Mhm.
risk for a business. And then if you don't build some protection around that, a good example is you are a business that's looking at growth and you have one really star performer that is doing your injectables.
Mhm.
Fabulous. Kudos. They don't have any clear signs of going anywhere. But what would happen if they were to leave? That's
Mhm.
a risk. In fact, that is a risk that is a single point of failure for a business. That's how I like to think about it. And
Yeah.
where you don't want to create doubt or insecurity in that staff member, that's a whole other conversation. You want to build protection around the business. It's no different than if a physician is the only source of income or revenue for a business. What happens if they have some epic event that puts them in the hospital or, God forbid, disabled? That
Mhm.
impacts a business. And so
Mhm.
you have to think about how am I going to continue to carry on the business if that person is incapacitated, whether it's long term or short term. And so there's a lot of things around how you think about your line of business. And it's not just replacing someone, it's how do I protect it if and when they potentially leave my business.
Yeah, it's such a good it's such a good point because and you're right. Like I always feel like people are in some ways they're almost held hostage by their fear of people leaving, that they create like an environment that makes people want to leave because they're so afraid of people leaving. And I think but you're right in that the idea of just preparing that it's inevitable, it's going to happen, which is this. I assume this is the idea of change management, which was something I don't know that I hadn't seen much of that term. I think I'd recognized it, but that was, when we talked about what we were going to talk about today, change management was kind of the thing that came up. What is change? Is there a definition for change management that you can like pinpoint, or is it just really how you manage change? Is that kind of the way that we think about
Well,
it?
I think that's the simplest way to think about it. It's no different than, there's a lot of terms that we start to use in the business world and we
Yeah.
start getting very complicated around our terminology sometimes. So we call, new staff talent. And so
Hmm.
change management is just like emotional intelligence. That's another buzzword in the industry when you think about
Right.
your staff and leveling up. So, change management is really an important concept that I think we only think about from more of the corporate world and those bigger
Mm,
organizations. But in effect, change management is more than just understanding that change happens. It's how you prepare for that change. How do you build in to your culture of your staff of knowing how to actually manage the insecurity or the uncertainty that comes from something that's new or additional to your business? I mean, change management is something that can be applied to just provide having a new type of service in your line items.
mhm.
So you add in a new device or you add in
Or
let's
new software, maybe.
right, new software, GLP-1s. That's
Right.
a big shift for a business, and how you manage that change incorporates how you prepare your staff.
Yeah, for sure. And we hear that a lot. You kind of hear, well, you have to be prepared for change because change is constant. The only thing that doesn't change is that change is constant. Um, but
True.
it's not so easy to just do that because people get, especially smaller businesses, and as smaller businesses get established, so it's not like you're brand new, you're no longer like a startup, you're not super nimble, everyone, you get a little established, people get a little comfortable. That's when we've dealt with this in our at AmSpa too. It's just like things, as you get comfortable, it's tough to start to do things differently. So let's talk about like why, first of all, do you see this more with this struggle with small businesses versus larger businesses? And why do practices in aesthetics specifically struggle with this?
Well, because I think that it's to your point, they're small businesses and they don't have the
Okay.
bandwidth to focus on
Yeah.
culture development or developing their teams in general. They're business all day long. They're trying to see patients, they're trying to pay their bills, they're trying to generate more revenue, they're trying to be competitive. And so
Mhm.
they're focused on what's right in front of them and not how do they continuously invest in developing their staff to hopefully prevent the chaos that comes with change. I mean, in its simplest forms, change management is really about how you guide your teams through any of that change, whether it's thinking about how you diffuse confusion, chaos, which ultimately lends itself to burnout or turnover.
Mhm.
And so it's really coming up with a better way of guiding your team through things. Um, and I think small practices really struggle with this because change is usually starting from the top down. So we think about it, an owner of a business will go to a meeting and purchase a new device, or they'll make the decision to add a new software or change out their software. And so it comes back to a business with massive confusion. And we basically tackle the things that you have to do, train the staff on how to use the new device, make sure that it's available as a price point to my patients to purchase, teach my staff how to manage the outcome of it. What are the post treatment concerns that I have to be aware of? What are the consents I need? The very basic things you have to execute on, but you don't really focus on the minutia around the chaos that it creates, and just listening to your staff and understanding how they're going to relate to it. Uh, you know, Change can create not just chaos, but definitely discontent and lend itself to a lot of insecurity in your teams.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's like, especially in this industry, aesthetics, especially where there's so much going on. There's so much movement. There is a lot of change. There's growth, right? Even just from, whether it's folks leaving or not, even just med spas in particular experience growth often very, very quickly, that you need to start adding new people. You need to expand. Sometimes you're adding locations. It does sound a lot like some of the emotional intelligence, that I've, some of those courses and some of those that guidance that I've heard. And this really comes from the top down, I would imagine. So it's got to be someone, it's got to start at the top. What, like, so when you're advising somebody, and there's chaos all around, I mean, how do you Or what are the steps? Like how do we get through this? Because it's something that a lot of folks struggle with.
I think we have to first recognize that this happens very quickly. And sometimes you have to just
Mm.
step back and listen. Active listening is key. It's very key.
Yeah.
Sit down, just sit down for 30 minutes with your staff and make these announcements that we're bringing
Mhm.
someone new on or we're changing out our software. But first, sit down and listen to your staff, but create the case of why. Why do we need to do this? But then listen. You'd be amazed at how you can dispel a lot of chaos and fear by just listening to your teams. And a lot of people don't even start with that. It's just an announcement. It's almost like we're dictating this. I'm an owner. I
Mhm.
can do this. I can do this because it's my business. At the end of the day, you still need the support as a business owner that your staff provide to you. Not only do you need their support, but you need them to actually lean in and you need those champions to help lead the way. And that comes with starting to actually bring them along.
Mhm.
Active listening is key to that. Starting
Okay.
the conversation is first and
Makes
foremost.
sense. First, really the first step. I think that's what about communicating the change? Because you mentioned, and I think you were right on, like as business owners, sometimes you get a little siloed among your kind of yourself, right? Because you are the owner and the CEO, so you're kind of in a bubble. Then you make a decision and you come out and you say it. And what about like how do you what's the best way, or is there maybe a best way to communicate the change? Do you do it to a certain level of people first and then you disseminate it down? Do you bring everybody in? Is there any guidance on that whatsoever, or is it really just kind of, you got to make sure that you're listening and doing what's best for your particular culture? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I think that there's honestly there's definitely approaches to this.
Yeah.
Nextech recently has gone through at a leadership level change management and how it impacts our industry,
Hmm.
but how it impacts a growing organization such as ourselves. We're over 500 employees, and decisions are happening, some of them rapidly. And how do we disseminate that and manage that all the way down through the ranks is key. So, yes, different sizes, different organizations can approach this very differently, which means that the different approaches can be very complicated or seem very complicated. I think the key takeaway here is from a small business perspective, you may have 2 or 3 employees. Change management is still something you should incorporate into just the most basic component of how you incorporate new services, new devices, new providers, new software, all those things. You have to have a level of recognition and awareness that it is change, that you need to communicate it, and that you need to actually explain why you're doing it. You don't have to have the complicated workflows built in around it like our company will, but you need to
Hmm.
have this basic starting point of, like I said, communicating the change first, listening to your staff. But why am I doing this? That's number one. Why am I doing this? That's key. It starts the level of engagement that you need. I think number two is identifying a champion. Who
Hmm.
within your small team can champion this? Because if you're the owner, you're not there to always manage the disgruntled conversations or the why are we doing this? We don't need to
Right.
change. We've all heard those things. So the champion is someone that is excited about this, that can help generate that goodwill and positivity that you need to be that secondary person beyond yourself that helps facilitate this change. So the champion is key to help identify, and they
Makes
help bring it
sense. Yep.
along. They're your staff are not just part of the change; they're the drivers of the change,
Yes. Well, they should be, right? They should be the driver. I guess they have to be almost, because you can't do it all yourself.
and that's a key area to note because a lot of times owners or managers don't recognize the key element that the staff actually have to drive this.
Yeah.
You can actually
Yeah.
state or indicate you're doing it, but you're not going to facilitate and execute on all of this. You need a
Yeah.
team to do it. Even a small business of 2 or 3 people has to have that understanding that my team actually drive this. So believe it or not, their value is really important. So I need to make sure that they are aware of the change. Some practices have gotten smart enough that they actually change by committee almost, where they might actually sit down and say, we're researching this, we're thinking about this, let's get your feedback on this. It generates some excitement. I go back to some of the generational approaches. Different generations approach and accept change. You can't dismiss that fact. And sometimes your younger generations like to be involved in the decision. They feel empowered. It is definitely a hallmark of a business that is trying to really invest in cultivating their staff well. So bringing them along for the change can also start not after you've made the decision, but prior to the decision. As long as you're thinking about it from the perspective of that could teeter either way, because you could get mass resistance. So you got to be careful how you actually bring that into the fold. Sometimes that isn't an option, though. Sometimes it's a lot of exit and there's change that's immediate, and that just starts with a conversation and they don't get to be part of the decision. So
yeah, and that's what I think you were going to go the same place I was going to go. So what happens though when either you bring somebody in early or even after you announce the change or the decision? There's, especially as your team gets bigger, there's gonna be somebody or some people who tend to be a little bit of a stick in the mud, and they resist everything, or they resist your exact whatever this decision is. Um, we've had that, and I found that to be it can be very disruptive, especially when it's not handled. And it's from somebody even that's a little higher up. So you said like you need a champion. I think that's really great advice. But the opposite of that is you've got somebody who's just not bought into it and is kind of resisting it and is fighting it almost. And that makes it way more difficult. How do you deal with that? What's some advice there?
First of all, you've got to recognize that resistance has every component or hallmark of being turned into an opportunity. So you have to think about it as resistance can be viewed as feedback, not failure, if you look at it carefully. And feedback is key. We always want feedback. And so leaning into maybe that person that tends to be your Debbie Downer is really just, that's their way of voicing feedback. And positioning it first and foremost as feedback and accepting or acknowledging with that person, hey, I appreciate that feedback. That's important for us to know. And let's talk about the why and, what those hurdles are and address those concerns. Avoiding concerns, even if you think that they're not relevant, is the wrong route. You want to make sure you're addressing concerns, especially from those people that are being negative about it. That resistance, you really want to focus on how you can turn that into, from a feedback perspective, back into an opportunity. Sometimes those people actually become your champions, or they start to back the champions because their resistance is sometimes very warranted, and you may have missed understanding that component. So it's an opportunity to actually turn it into something positive.
Yeah, I agree. And when they do, you're absolutely right. When you have somebody who initially resisted and then they, for whatever reason, right? If it's just all of a sudden kind of that change is made, the light bulb goes on, they get it, or for whatever reason, you're able to reach them, or however that happens, it becomes a very, very different type of champion too, because they're not doing it from the beginning. It's somebody who's was really had to be kind of convinced, and that becomes a lot more effective for others. What about if there's, I mean, have you ever had to deal with where there's been like a group or a contingent of people who maybe are resisting? And how do you deal with that?
Oh, those are fun. Generally, to some degree, when that happens, it is harder because sometimes they're a force against you. And so it goes back to listening to each of those concerns. You have to listen to each one. And eventually, most of those concerns, if you've listen, it goes back to, did you make the right decision in the first place to actually incorporate whatever you're changing? Let's take software. So you're planning to change your software system. Is it for the right reasons? And if it's for the right reasons, whatever those obstacles are, you're going to turn them into an opportunity, because the concerns that those individuals have, whether they come in force that everybody's concerned, we've seen that. A lot of times the clinical staff tend to be our strongest resistance force. They have a lot of concerns. There's a lot of change there. And so you have to break down each of those concerns. Some of them you can address immediately by stating, yes, we thought about that. This is how we're going to solve for that. But some of the things you may not have thought of, and it goes back to, did I have the right team in place when I went into this decision-making process, when I went into discovery to decide, hey, we're going to change software systems? Did I have the right team in place to help us make that decision? So if you're a larger business set, you probably need to make decisions outside of a bubble, and they need to incorporate a few of the key stakeholders within your business that will eventually champion. So like if I'm, got 4 or 5 providers in more than one location, I'm going to pull in several people in different departments that are going to be critical as when I think about how we make this change, when I think about the decision. Those same individuals that are part of the decision for the change become your champions within those departments to help resolve any of those concerns, as well as surface any of those concerns that you had not thought of.
Yeah, I love that.
And that's really critical. Making decisions in a bubble is the wrong path if you're trying to make decisions that are going to impact the bigger line of business.
Yeah, I think that's again, so I guess maybe there's a different dynamic when there's resistance before the decision is made, right? Because then it's there's a quote that I think it was like Jeff Bezos way back when, he said, part of what management does is you disagree and commit. Meaning if there's a disagreement, okay, fine, you voice your disagreement, you get it out, you talk it through, but then if the decision is made, you got to commit to supporting it. Which is maybe, a little not quite as kind of warm and fuzzy as what we're talking about. But if there is that resistance ahead of time, so doing kind of your example from what you just said, you're bringing these stakeholders in ahead of time to get them to buy in because they're going to be your champions in each department. They're going to have an impact on how it filters down. What if there's resistance in that side of it, and they're just not buying into the idea? They're not buying into the reasons and all the things that you mentioned before. But in the end, you and maybe the rest of the team are committed to it. That's something where you have to kind of start. At some point you got to be like, look, you got to get on board with this. And how do you do that? I mean, that's maybe a little bit difficult.
Well, you have to decide, is this a personnel issue? Is this the right person to be in this organization?
Yeah.
Because sometimes the fit's just not right because your directions are too far apart. And sometimes that becomes clear as you go down this path of major change in a business. And sometimes it's just not as visible until you get to one of these strategic decisions within your business. And that's a hard place to be. But at the end of the day, if you are a business owner and you've gotten the right advice, you've done the right diligence on determining if it is the right course of action for your business, and if the business is, large enough that you should have gone to internal stakeholders and really made sure the decision was, you understood all of the concerns and risks involved and what the opportunities were as well, and you had weighed those all out, and you still had one person, and it's usually one person, to be honest, it is really, truly resistant. One has to ask the question, is this the right place for them?
Right. Yeah.
A place, but it's truly sometimes where you end up. Now, sometimes it doesn't mean that they can't be resistant, but still be part of the change. They just remain pessimistic, but they may not be part of your champion set. And there may be some, conversations to say, hey, listen, I recognize that you're resistant to this, but I expect as your position in this organization, you will follow through with what the goal is and what the intent is of the change. And then I'm going to understand that we have your support in doing this and that you're going to support the organization. And if they can't support it, then there's those decisions that have to be made that sometimes are tough. But if they're a leader in the business, and leaders aren't necessarily always managers, sometimes you have to make that decision. Okay, well, this is important for my business to grow, for my business to perform at a different level. This is part of my strategy. Then you have to decide if they're the right person to move forward with business. Tough.
And that's tough. That's tough, obviously. I'm curious with, Nextech, obviously you have a lot of exposure to aesthetics in general, including dermatology, plastic surgery, and other aspects. Have you noticed with med spas in particular, is there um, is there one thing that you feel like folks maybe miss more than others when it comes to change, like what they're missing out on? Is it the training aspect, the way they're communicating things? Is there something that you think is kind of more pervasive in our kind of subset of the industry than in others?
Yeah, I would have to say that the hardest thing that I see is that there's a lot of small businesses that are opened or really run by, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, and they're eager, they're talented, and they're really great at what they do. Let's face it, surgeons don't love doing injectables, they love doing surgery. And so this has kind of evolved over the years where this component of having nurse injectors and PAs and physician's assistants all start to manage these services, and they do it very well. They do it all the time. And so now you're starting to see where we've seen this industry evolve, where they've decided to hang their own shingle, their own brick and mortar.
Yep.
But what they do really well is provide those services, but they don't really understand running the business part. And a part of that is the staffing. And that's where I think the miss is in a lot of these businesses. Now, they may not feel that they're big enough to hire an office manager, but there's a lot of businesses out there that provide fractional services that I think are really helpful. There's a lot of great consultants out there that have a heavy hand in helping steer and direct and manage and coach these practices. I would say that they don't lean into that enough. They want to do what they do well, which is provide services.
Right.
But what they don't do well is manage the staffing component or the line of business as well. And that's where the opportunity really lies in this area. And it's frustrating because it's not only frustrating to them because they want to inject, but there's all these other responsibilities that come with it. You can't hang a shingle and expect for payroll to happen automatically or for people just to, appear naturally. You've got to cultivate them. And if you want them to stay, you have to invest in what it means to get them to stay. Or it's going to cost you more and you're going to struggle to build a business. That is a big area of opportunity. And I know that AmSpa is really focused on education around this. And I think that that's one of the biggest opportunities in the med spa market specifically.
Yeah, it's tough because it takes a certain amount of self-awareness and self-reflection, right? Which is tough when when you start your own business, it's like you're doing everything and you've got to, you have to have a certain amount of confidence and courage to go out on your own and do it. And so at some point, taking a step back and saying, I need help with this particular skill because it's maybe not what I'm best at. And certainly managing people is one of those things so difficult. It's like, really the hardest thing that folks will ever do. It's just, man, I mean, what is it about managing people? It again, and I don't want to sound like a curmudgeon here because it's not. Like a lot of the time it's great working with folks, but it really is difficult. And for some people, like I've always struggled with it. I feel like I'm sometimes too nice. I don't want to hurt people's feelings. Like it's really, really hard to kind of toe that line. Between being a really good, strong leader, manager, and then also at the same time, knowing you've got to run a business, and this is no joke to the people who own it. So it's tough.
Well, it's recognizing where your strengths lie
Right.
And understanding that if you want to build your business and you're a great injector and you're a great provider and you really know how to manage that patient clinical experience, get the right people to do what you do really well on the other side of the house.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, I mean, when Nextech decided to really focus on med spa as a core specialty, we had to undergo some changes internally because it's a different level of managing that type of practice. So just like that practice has to understand that, I'm a provider, I've opened my business and I've got to manage staff and software and everything. That was a definite impact on us on how we managed that type of line of business. We've had to really take a look at what we were doing and incorporate some
Mhm.
change management into that. Even looking at how we can invest some of those change management skills training back into just those med spas as they're opening their business and or putting new software in. And we're thinking about how we actually coach those owners slash managers into what it means to actually incorporate change management into you're adding new software, you're changing your software. Let's help you understand what that means to your staff and how you can manage them better. That's how we're addressing some of that because we know they need that. And right now it's critical to us to be successful as well.
Yeah. Well, this is good stuff. I mean, I love to hear about it. And I'm actually so first of all, you're gonna come out to Terranea, which
Yep.
is again in just a few short weeks. I think we got 5 weeks. It's the first weekend in October.
Mhm.
And you're on a panel, I believe, among other things, with Terry Ross
Yep.
and Amy Lynn about managing people and solving the culture, and especially in, small business, all run by very powerful, successful women. It's a very different and dynamic environment. I'm so looking forward to that panel in particular because there's so many cool just people that are going to be there. I'm sure the questions are going to be awesome. What can you tell me about that? What are you looking forward to, and what do you expect for folks to get out of that?
I love the engagement. I
Yeah,
love
me too.
listening to some of these really, I mean, I've seen some of the people that are coming. I'm super excited about the people that are going
Yeah,
to be attending and speaking, collaborating with them. I love to learn. That's one of my key, components of what is important to me. And so learning at these events is key, but also being able to collaborate and share the ideas. This is where you get the greats in the house, so many people to share. I mean, people that are coming to this are just going to walk away with so much. They're almost have to make a list, Alex, of things that they're going to want to do and time it out because they're going to learn so much. And I think that's going to be key here.
yeah. I can't wait. We're up to just about. I think we're have 100 so far attendees and growing. I mean, and it's a smaller, more intimate event, but it's just nothing but like incredible powerhouse business owners and attendees, and people can just come and you can learn from these. I remember it's almost intimidating to be there, and just because I feel like I don't even know what I'm doing there, but anyway, I can't wait to see you there. I can't wait to see the panel. I think it's going to be super exciting, and I appreciate all of this insight. Where can folks learn more about Nextech, learn more about change management or anything like that? Where can they hear more from you if they need to, so they can find you?
Oh, well, my emails are .ntoh@nextech.com or nextech.com is our website. We also have our own podcast, Aesthetically Speaking, and not hard to find us. We're out there.
That's
Thank
awesome. Yeah, no, and Nextech is again has been a big part of what we do, and we're very happy for their support. And come out and see them in at Terranea outside of LA in October for the Women's Aesthetic Leadership Conference. That's going to be amazing. Robin Ntoh will be there. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time. I know you're busy, but this was awesome.
Thank you. Love it. Thank you.
Refresh your body, mind, and career at the Women in Aesthetic Leadership Conference, being held October 3rd through 5th at California's beautiful Terranea Resort. Walk is more than just another convention. It's an immersive retreat that combines education and networking with rejuvenation. For women aesthetic professionals who dedicate their time to the health and happiness of others, this is the opportunity to get away and focus on your own wellness. Reconnect to your passions and return with a bold new inspiration for your business. Walk celebrates the med spa industry's opportunities for female empowerment and entrepreneurship, including the ceremony for the 2025 Distinguished Women Awards. Find out more at experiencewalk.com. That's experiencewalc.com. And as a Medical Spa Insider listener, you can receive 10% off your registration if you use the promo code WALK10. That's WALC10.
Promo code valid for inclusive registration until September 11th, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, or standard registration until October 3rd, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Promo code only applies to the primary registrant and cannot be combined with any additional offers. Thank you to our producers, Madeline Muller, Marketing Content Coordinator, who organizes the podcast schedule and guests, provides topics and talking points. And myself, Joe DeGuzman, Technology Operations Manager. I handle the audio and video editing, voiceovers, and tech. Kate Harper, Senior Digital Marketing Coordinator, who makes all of our graphics and manages the podcast platform. Esme Uriostegui, Senior Social Media Coordinator, who makes and posts all the clips for the podcast and posts them to our social feeds. Our music is by Ghost Score. Thank you for listening to or watching the Medical Spa Insider podcast. Please follow or subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcasts and subscribe to our YouTube channel for future episodes. For more information about the American Med Spa Association, please check our show notes or in the description below.